Good evening. I was going to say good afternoon, but it's good evening, everyone. And I thank you for sticking with us, and I'm happy to help bring us home. I'm excited to be here among my fellow optimists, especially on Earth Day. So, optimists, we believe we can dream big, think big, do big. But I want to challenge us to consider, are we thinking big enough? How big? Sometimes I think, despite our optimism, we doubt what's possible. We start small. We think, well, we can scale up. But sometimes we don't even have a really good plan for how we're going to scale up. And we often don't have the luxury of time to scale up to address the scale of threats that we're facing on Earth. So I want to challenge us to think big. I want to tell you a story about starting big. This is a story of starting with the Amazon. The story starts with the Amazon Region Protected Areas Program, or ARPA. So by protected areas, I'm talking about national parks, wildlife refuges, indigenous reserves, the full scope of conservation areas. Through ARPA, WWF worked with partners to permanently fund the conservation and sustainable use of 150 million acres of the Brazilian Amazon. That's big. 150 million acres. That's larger than 2 Californias. Elaine, I'm sorry, that's actually large. That's 3 times the size of the national park system in the US. So we're talking scale here. And the way that the big idea behind how ARPA was secured means that it's ARPA for life. So what was the big idea that made ARPA for life? So well, where was I going here? So the big idea, I want to share with you the story of the big idea, the results of that approach, and where we go from here. So like many types of innovation, we took an idea from one sector and applied it to another. Specifically, we took an idea from private finance. So if you think about large-scale infrastructure deals around the world, you wouldn't start to build a bridge unless you had all of the finance in place, all of the partners, all of the agreements in place to ensure that you could finish the job. So our idea was, what if you took this idea from transportation infrastructure, billions and trillion-dollar deals done all around the world, what if you took that idea and applied it to green infrastructure? Could you secure our green infrastructure kind of once and for all, for life? And this approach addresses a very real problem. So this approach, called Project Finance for Permanence, addresses a problem illustrated by the story of Segundo. Segundo is a dedicated park ranger who is tasked with patrolling a huge expanse of protected area. But there are days when he doesn't have even enough gas to put in his truck, let alone the equipment or the backup that he would need to protect himself against illegal loggers and poachers. If we think about this in context, in the global context, in developing countries, only about 1/3 of the finance we need is in place to secure protected areas. We depend on protected areas to safeguard much of the world's biodiversity. And yet, when we inadequately finance or do it in a piecemeal way, these important protected areas, the consequences are dire. A recent study found that only 1/4 of these protected areas were actually doing the job that they were set up to do. The rest were, in effect, what we call paper parks. On the flip side, we know that when we increase funding to protected areas, we see a related decline in threats, such as deforestation. Oops. The Amazon is one of the most threatened forests on the planet. If we don't do something fundamentally different to protect it, if we don't address this fundamental problem, we risk losing most of it within a few decades, a couple decades. And I don't want to have to explain to my kids, what was the Amazon. So how do we do things differently? So what was the idea, or how did we get ARPA off the ground? I'm going to highlight 3 aspects. The first is rigorous planning. So we spent 2 years doing the financial and the conservation planning to really understand what would be necessary to secure ARPA into the future. We looked at this top down, bottom up. The second aspect, and this is where I'll describe kind of the mechanism that got the deal done, is this idea of a single closing to mobilize all the resources. So the idea behind ARPA was a single deal that mobilizes all of the resources, all of the institutional commitments that you would need to permanently conserve and achieve this game-changing goal. So there was a comprehensive agreement among all the donors and partners that laid out conditions that needed to be met in order for the deal to close. These conditions were things like appropriate staffing levels, future funding commitments, policy changes that would be needed in order to sustainably manage the protected areas system. And the deal could not close unless those conditions were met and all the funding was in place. So each donor leveraged the other, and the risk was managed across all of those commitments. A particularly innovative aspect about this fund, because there are trust funds out there for protected areas, was that this was a transition fund or a sinking fund where the government assumed financial responsibility over time. So the way this works is that there are disbursement conditions around sustainable management and sustainable financing. And if those are not met, the funds do not flow. If orange stops, yellow stops. The final aspect I would highlight, and this may be obvious, but partners are essential. So the role that WWF played in all this was really as an innovator and convener. Without the political will of the government of Brazil, this deal couldn't have happened. So this goes back to a commitment made many years ago by President Cardozo and was carried through to the closing of the deal. So partners are essential. That doesn't necessarily, they're essential, but it doesn't always make it easy. So when I started working on these project finance deals, I was having a heart attack every week because I thought, oh my God, the deal's dead, the deal's dead. And it took my colleague and ARPA veteran, Meg Symington, to put this in context. She said, oh, we thought ARPA was dead plenty of times. But in 2014, after years of planning, designing, negotiating, the ARPA for Life deal closed, and it secured 15% of the Brazilian Amazon. The deal, the fund amount was $215 million that would be dispersed over a period of 25 years. So what did we get for ARPA for Life? Well, we did get improved management, we got reduced deforestation, but we got so much more than that.
É a casa de 30 milhões de pessoas.
30 miljoen.
La maison.
135种的语言。
Et des centaines de milliers d'espèces.
Sute de mi.
Na emi hang bin ples blumi.
Our home.
Te otthonod.
By recycling the world's carbon dioxide into oxygen,
O Amazonas revitaliza o nosso planeta.
Pura Brahman.
The entire planet.
I pomaga ustabilizować klimat.
In Vancouver.
In Hannover, Deutschland.
Papua New Guinea.
In Argentina.
Yangon Mama.
한국의 서울에서.
Ethiopiano.
В России, в Сибири.
Bogotá, Colômbia.
No Brasil.
La Amazonia.
Almost 20% of the world's river water flows here. El Amazonas.
Das Kernstück unseres fragilen, globalen Ökosystems.
The Amazon.
donde nuestro planeta es alimentado.
Tarihin Amazon tarihi na ne.
Mero katha hai.
C'est mon histoire.
Is our story.
E ваша история.
E hoje a Amazônia precisa da nossa ajuda.
Y la ayuda ha llegado.
So that's it. So help has arrived. Now, you may be wondering if you've heard anything about Brazil lately. It's in political and financial turmoil. So the question is ARPA holding? We're at the Optimist Summit. I would say we are cautiously optimistic. This will really test the model and you know, how it holds. But I will say that regardless, safe to say that we are in a much better place than we would have been without ARPA for Life. As the Amazon knows no political boundaries, we're now replicating this model in Peru and Colombia. But we're not satisfied with looking at just the Amazon. So we are also working in Asia now. We have a deal in Bhutan. And it was the Bhutanese prime minister who was traveling the globe touting this initiative that introduced this idea of it's not just Amazon or ARPA for Life, it's not just Bhutan for life, we need Earth for life. So this is what we're trying to do now. So we want to learn from the ARPA example. We want to look at other project finance deals that have been done in Costa Rica, Great Bear Rainforest in Canada, and we want to scale this up. We're thinking, what if we could do this in 10 countries over the next 10 years? We need a platform of partners. We need more partners. We need a lot more money. But we think if we work together, we could leverage up to over $1 billion to apply this model in the places where it can have the biggest impact. And so I ask us all to continue to think big. In the Amazon, it's imperative. But we also know from ARPA for Life that it's possible. So not just dream, but do. And think about what's your Amazon in the places you work. We've already heard some really great ones. So I encourage everyone to not just dream, not just think, do big. And the key is that we need to do it together. Thanks.